Did you know that the majority of medically unexplained symptoms do have a root cause and they may be linked to hidden trauma in your childhood? Hello, I'm Patricia Warby, PhD, award-winning pain specialist and trauma-informed practitioner. And on this channel, we talk about healing at the emotional level so that we can be the most successful versions of ourselves in our lives. And if that interests you, please subscribe and welcome to my community. Okay, so last week I was talking about what is hidden trauma, and I covered some of the differences between overt trauma or shock trauma and these kind of relational or complex traumas that most people have some of. In fact, it's very difficult to get through a childhood without some. How might you know that you have hidden trauma? Okay, well, the first thing is to understand that some of the experiences that you might be going through, some of the symptoms you're having that defy medical practice, may actually be an underlying clue. The most common are pain and fatigue. If they've been hanging around longer than 6 months, we call them chronic. And chronic conditions like that are very poorly treated by the medical system because basically they try to manage the symptoms without looking at the root cause. Now, as I've said, hidden trauma is something that most people experience. How does it cause something physical like pain or fatigue? Well, for that, you need to understand the science of the nervous system. And I've talked many times on this channel about the autonomic nervous system, which, another way of saying that would be the automatic nervous system, the one that goes on behind the scenes and does all the things that you don't have to think about, like digesting your food or breathing or your heart rate. These are all controlled by your autonomic nervous system. And this comes from the back of your brain down through the spinal cord, has one arm called the sympathetic side, and that's kind of activating fight and flight system. And there's another nerve that comes down in front of that called the vagus nerve, really important nerve because that's the calming or rest and digest system. It's part of your parasympathetic system. And you've got basically those two arms, and they tend to work in opposition. So if the sympathetic speeds your heart up, which it does when you breathe in, the parasympathetic slows it down when you breathe out. But there are many other examples throughout the body of different organs that are innervated by the autonomics. And largely what they're doing is they're reading your internal state. And your internal state isn't just your blood flow or the pH level of your blood or where your food is in your digestive system. It's also linked to your emotional state because the autonomics control not only your physiology, but your autonomics control your emotions as well. And they respond to your emotions. And so it's a feedback loop on itself. So have you ever noticed when you're feeling good, maybe you've fallen in love for the first time, everything works better, right? Whereas if you're stressed and anxious, your guts go very, very liquid, don't they? And sometimes your heart becomes irregular. So you understand that your emotions are not just feelings, they're physiological regulators. They inform literally your internal state. And because it's a feedback system, the more anxious you feel, the less likely that balance is going to happen well. And so that's when we start to get symptoms in the body, is when the autonomic nervous system is not functioning well. Now, why might that be? Well, clearly there are stresses in the life which will affect you. Things like financial stress or relationship stress, or maybe even if you've had an illness or an infection, that can be a major stress that can set this chronic pattern in motion. We've seen that with long COVID, haven't we? So somatic symptoms start usually early on. They come up usually in childhood because a sensitized nervous system is going to reveal itself quite early. And so there are certain really common issues like ear, nose, and throat infections and skin issues and digestive symptoms that can arise as a sort of little clue. And I'm going to go over those in more detail next week. But there are also emotional patterns of high sensitivity. Okay, you don't deal with shocks and surprises very well. You ruminate on things. Maybe you consider yourself an anxious person. You can't let go of an issue, particularly if it's emotional. I know this because I've had it all my life. But the links with chronic physical illness are less well understood. And I think understanding that the nervous system informs both, it responds to both, is a clue to why when people don't deal with their unresolved emotional patterns, they're much more likely to get physical symptoms, particularly as life goes on and you reach adulthood, and then life stresses add into an already stressed system and just tip it into overwhelm. And overwhelm is really the big problem, is when the autonomic nervous system can no longer manage, it can no longer have enough capacity to respond to the life stress because it's already at the top of its limit. And that's when it tips over into that state of overwhelm, which can be heart palpitations, it can be brain fog, this terrible fatigue that people feel, and sometimes terrible pain as well. And so these are kind of where the body is kind of screaming at you to look at some of the underlying emotions that might be driving these symptoms. But because modern medicine doesn't look at this, it's unlikely you're going to hear this from your doctor or practitioner. Now, don't forget, this channel is all about dealing with emotional patterns and healing them. So please, if you're interested, please do subscribe. It really helps my algorithm. And so I'm going to just finish up then by giving you a little clue as to what may occur when you get the symptoms and how we might intervene. Now, understanding that the nervous system is the central control center for everything that happens to you is really the missing piece in the medical picture, because modern medicine treats conditions symptomatically. It's based on an acute medicine model where you get an infection, they treat the infection. You get a pain, they treat the body part that has the pain. Unfortunately, this doesn't work with chronic symptoms that have been embedded through this central nervous system pattern that's wired from your childhood. And because most doctors don't learn psychology, they don't understand why your childhood might inform what you're experiencing now as an adult. And so that's where I come in. I wrote a book called The Scar That Won't Heal. I wrote that in 2015. It's recently been updated. But it was all about making these links, because actually we need to understand that the links are really, really key to how you might heal. And more recently, I've produced a free downloadable ebook called Hidden Trauma. And if you're interested to know a little more, I'd really encourage you to download that. The links will be in the description below. To understand that most people have some form of trauma from their childhood, but not everybody responds in the same way to them. It's much more likely, if your nervous system is sensitive, that you will actually show physical symptoms. And so understanding this is key to healing it. Now, we can't change necessarily the way our nervous system is wired. We can alter some of the connections because actually our brain is adaptable, malleable. You're not going to change your personality, but what you're going to do is make the responses more adaptive and less scripted, less programmed into a negative consequence. And so understanding where it comes from, realizing that you can actually change your neurology to some extent, you can change that hyper-responsiveness into overwhelm and bring down the level of nervous system activation. So you've got a little bit more of what's called the window of tolerance before you tip into overwhelm is key to reversing not just mental ill health, but also physical ones too. And that, for me, is the hidden link. That's the one that nobody talks about. And that's why I called my ebook Hidden Trauma. So please download that if you're interested and want to know more. You can also find more on my website, which is alchemytherapies.co.uk. And I'll look forward to hearing from you. Take care, everybody. Speak soon. Bye-bye.